All right. Well, good morning. It's afternoon where I am. I'm in Ontario. And I want to talk a little bit about speaking truth to power. So it's a phrase that you may have heard, and it has a couple of different definitions. It was first found in writing by Bayard Rustin in 1942. And the idea is that when someone speaks truth to power, it's someone who has the courage to say something that they believe is true to someone who holds some authority over them and are likely to find some offense or distaste to it and potentially have negative actions. And the way that it was first coined, which is very appropriate for us in a Sunday service, was that Bayard Rustin was a Black Quaker in the US. And in 1942, he said, and I will quote, "The primary function of a religious society is to speak the truth to power. The truth is war is wrong." And so, of course, during the First and Second World War, if you were speaking out against the war, you would face all sorts of negative social consequences. You could, some people would have the religious exemption. Quakers were famous for that, but many were not. And the power of the religious society getting together to give one another that power to be a conscientious objector, speak the truth that war is wrong, allowed them to do that with slightly more freedom, but there was still those negative consequences. And as a Black man, he lived in the US, it was even more so. So when we talk about speaking truth to power, who has the power, it's not just someone in direct authority over you, although that is often the case. There's another woman who did a TED talk, and her name, and I'm going to pop some information in the chat a little later, is, oh, holy moly, I'm losing my notes on her name now, of course. Okay, well, I will put that in the chat later. There is a wonderful TED talk, and it's called How Your Power Silences. And she talks about how authority isn't just about that direct authority, but can also be to do with race, can be to do with gender, can be to do with sexuality, class, immigration status, all of these kind of social things that are going on where you may have a marginalized identity in some way, and expressing your opinions could bring on these negative consequences. And there are some really good articles to look out there to think about, why am I not speaking this truth? What is holding me back? And often it is those pieces around authority and around what you think your negative consequences would be if you are speaking the truth, which we hope would never be the case, but often is. And especially with people like Bayard Rustin, he would face very serious consequences. A lot of people, when they're speaking truth to power, have their lives at stake. A very famous example and a fantastic example of someone doing that, of course, is Malala Yousafzai. She spoke truth to power at 12 years old, speaking out against the Taliban, and then only a few years later at 15 was shot because of it. There are other spaces where there are these great examples of people speaking truth to power and suffering negative consequences. But there are so many everyday ones as well that are not always as life or death, but are often take that courage that we don't realize. When a few years ago, there were a group of religious educators within the Unitarian Universalist movement who got together and asked us to do a white supremacy teach-in. It was a time to disrupt the worship service and talk about the problems with white supremacy, to teach about it, what it meant, and how it was affecting our congregations. And this call went out wide, and it was led by religious educators, and religious educators often went to the ministers of the congregations who were their supervisors. And many of them were threatened with their jobs. And many congregations were not able to do this teaching because the people who brought it forwards were threatened for their jobs. A youth advisor that I know who was working in New Jersey was a woman of color. She'd worked for the congregation for a few years as a youth advisor, and she noticed something strange in her congregation. The auction, which was normally a themed event, the theme this year was a night in Havana. And on the poster were some racial caricatures of Cuban people. And so she brought this up to the auction committee and said, listen, this is not appropriate. This is hurtful. Can we change it? And because she was just a youth advisor, even though she had been lauded for her work, been seen as a member of the community, she was shut down. She was shut down so hard that she was told that until they could get a meeting put together, she wasn't allowed to talk about racial justice with the youth group at all. Even though she was not planning to talk about this event, they decided that they would shut down even more. And she was worried for her job, for mentioning something that we should hopefully accept as humble criticism and look at what we're doing. A friend of mine was at a UU seminary, and it was a big controversy because someone had sent out emails that were disparaging one of the presidential candidates. And they thought it was one of the students. And so to find out who had breached this covenant, they asked all of their students to give access to every email they had sent over their time in seminary. And my friend said no. She said, I'm in a ministerial position and this would be inappropriate. It would be a breach of trust for you to see all of my emails. I promise it was not me who did it. You can investigate me in other ways, but this way is not right. They withheld her degree. They would not allow her to graduate until all of this kind of came to a head. And I believe it was over a year that she did not have her degree from graduation. Turns out it wasn't her, which I am unsurprised about. But she wanted to hold that boundary and that peace and speaking that truth to power, even though she'd spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time, and couldn't get recognized. It was important for her to do. So all of these examples are really good examples of how you can speak truth to power, how some people speak truth to power when they have really big pieces at stake. With the white supremacy teaching itself, I was working in a Canadian congregation, and I'd gone to the minister and said, this is coming up, I'd love to do it. And she said, yes, but those two services don't work because one was an ordination and one was something else. I said, great. How about I do it for the children that day and for the adults on the Tuesday night? Perfect, great plan. I go to the worship committee meeting that week and I tell them, as you can tell, we've got a really busy worship calendar. This white supremacy teaching call has come out. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to do it with the children on the Sunday and for the adults on the Tuesday night, just to let you know why we're not disrupting the service. And the minister, who'd already told me it was okay, said in front of the committee, you'll lose your job if you try and lead that workshop. I was shocked. She repeated this 7 times in the meeting. And every one of the committee members that were there, the volunteers, who were all white, spent more time debating why white supremacy wasn't the term they were comfortable with, rather than looking at how their staff members' job was being threatened. And of course, at the time, my immigration status as well, because I was not a permanent resident at the time. And I ended up in tears in the meeting. And I had to say, I apologize, I am not upset with anyone in this room, which was half true. I am more upset that I am having to balance my job security, immigration, and safety with talking about those whose job security, immigration, and safety is often so tenuous because of racial issues. And it is very difficult for me to make that decision to put my own needs, where do I put them in place of teaching about the wider piece? And that's what Speaking Truth to Power is often about, is where we have this debate with where can I and where can I not afford to exercise my privilege and exercise what I could and could not lose in speaking truth that may help maybe myself, but most often other people in the world. And is a very difficult piece to be in. Most of the time, most of us here have some of that leverage where we might just be scared to say something, but the actual implications are unlikely to be as difficult as we think they will. But we still hold ourselves back. There are people out there who cannot speak because their implications are much heavier than ours are, than some of ours may be, depending on who I'm talking to right now. And they will always change depending on who. There is always someone out there who has higher struggles than each one of us. And trying to figure out where we can and where we cannot. Even when talking about the origins of the phrase, with the Quakers speaking truth to power, they have themselves looked at saying, that is true, that is our value. And at some times, when we are trying to work with countries where we are helping the citizens of those countries, if we let go of our neutrality, we don't get to go and do the work that we are actively, physically helping others with. If we spoke our truth to power, that would be taken away, but it would affect other people who are more marginalized than ourselves. So there are times when it is very prudent to keep that truth quiet in order to serve later, but normally not when we're serving ourselves. The thing that I wanted to bring up though, when I found the woman's name, it's Megan Reitz, and I will put it in the chat after. One of the biggest things that wows me is, I don't know if you remember, but there was a woman named Maxine Waters, and she was a representative for California, and she is now famous for reclaiming her time. She was in court and she was questioning someone, and she was asking a question and they were doing what they always do. Well, thank you so much. Oh, you're so fantastic. And she said, reclaiming my time. I don't need you to spend your time that you're allowed to answer telling me how fantastic I am. You're wasting it. Answer the question I'm asking you. Oh, well, I was going to get to that. I'm just saying that we've done this, reclaiming my time. I need you to answer the question directly so that you're not going to be wasting the time that I have. And this went on, reclaiming my time, reclaiming my time, reclaiming my time. And the thing is that she didn't necessarily have any looming authority pressures on her. But that struck a chord in particularly women and people of color around the world, because Maxine Waters is a Black woman, of reclaiming my time. Because even though she was well within her right, she broke no rules. There was very little consequences. That social pressure stopped so many people from doing it that it was shocking that she would even try. It was newsworthy that she would even do this. And the white man that she was talking to was shocked. How can I answer when she's doing this? I thought I'd be able to answer. I thought I wouldn't be interrupted. Sounds very spidery to me. And she, as a ladybird, was saying, reclaiming my time, reclaiming my time. And the call went out around the world because it's shocking that people would be allowed to say it. And I wish it wasn't, but it often is. People don't know, they don't dare, it's not the done thing, and the unknown consequences often hold people back. But I implore us that if we do that, if we feel in that space, we really look at what we might lose and whether it's worth saying it anyway. But most of us are on the other end. So Megan Reitz, I will pop the link in the chat, was about how most of us will be in the position where our power silences others. And there are many traps that we fall in when we do that. So when people want to bring us truth, first of all, let's be righteously angry, gentle, angry people. Allow that anger to come out. I remember watching a clip where a woman who was a Muslim was talking to a woman who was saying very anti-Islamic things. And the woman who was anti-Islamic, one second. The woman who was anti-Islamic, my dog does not like anti-Islamic. Excuse me. There we go. Anti-Islamic things, was being very polite, very spidery, in saying exactly why she thought that Muslims shouldn't be able to exist in Australia. That's what it was about. And the Muslim woman was using disparaging language to shut her opinions down. And someone watched that and said, oh, well, they're both as bad as each other. I don't listen to either of them. You don't listen to either of them when one person is saying that she shouldn't exist and all she is saying is shut up. That's not appropriate. How are you listening to the spider who is polite, who is eating them, and condemning the angry ladybird who is just trying to stop herself from being eaten, her friends from being eaten, and maybe you from being eaten, but because this person's saying it so politely, you don't notice the difference, or you purposefully don't notice the difference. So we may want to speak our truth in love, but sometimes that comes out as anger, and it shouldn't stop us when we're in power from listening when it does. So the three things, and you should watch the TED Talk, but I'll go over these very quickly. The three things that she talks about, the traps that we have. One, the biggest one, is we forget how scary we are. We forget what authority we have. We forget what it was like to be a child and look up at someone who was now our age and think, wow, they're a big person, they know a lot. We forget what it was like when we had bosses and now we're the boss. We forget what it was like when we are talking to someone who has a title or who has a position, and maybe we never had those feelings ourselves because we were never underneath those positions. We never had those marginalized identities. We don't know what that scariness is from, but we forget how scary we can be. The other piece, she goes on to talk about how we often have like an imaginary list of whose opinions count and whose don't, even if we're not being subconscious about it. And we also, the last one, oh, that's right. We send out shut up signals instead of speak up signals. And even if we think we're great, 9 out of 10 times I send out speak up signals, that 10th time is the time that will shut people down for a long time. When you're crabby, when you're tired. Samuel Goldwyn was a director, and he said, I don't want any yes men around me. I want people to tell me the truth, even if it costs them their job. Well, who's going to tell him the truth? We don't realize the messages we're giving, even if my door's always open, but if you come in, I'm busy and I'm looking at you as if you shouldn't say anything. That's not good enough. We have to be intentional. So think about what we do when people do speak out. She gave a great example about how someone in a forum put his hand up and said, listen, I might be fired for this, but this is my opinion. And the good listener, the good boss, put him on a panel and on a board to look at that issue and deal with that issue, and promoted him. Because you speak out, you get heard. Now you have to keep our boundaries and make sure that those speakings out are done in ways that are not causing harm as well. So we have to have this really delicate balance, the courage to speak up for ourselves, the wisdom to invite others to speak up, the humility to listen to what is being said, no matter how it is being said, and the compassion to hold boundaries around the behavior of how that message is getting to us. So it is okay for someone to be angry, and we should be listening to their message. And we still have to put boundaries around what behavior that person may be giving, even if they come from a place of deep hurt and anger. We can still listen and keep someone boundaried so that other people don't feel like they are in danger from listening to that as well. They're so hard to make that balance. So I hope that all of us, always, we need more of awareness of ourselves. How scary are we? How scary are we not? Humility, compassion, and skill. And those are the pieces that I'm going to end us with today.
Liz, thank you so